Courage and honor, cousin.
Into the fires of battle, unto the anvil of war.
Hello, and welcome to Warhammer 40k's Grim History from the Beyond. I'm Zekdar.
And I'm Yuxin.
We are the chroniclers of all that was, and all that will be in the 41st millennium. We've seen the rise and fall of many empires, and in the next couple of months, we will be discussing the tumultuous history of the world of Armageddon.
That's right, Zekdar, and this week we will be discussing Ghazghul's second invasion of Armageddon, and more importantly, the Siege of Helsreach.
Indeed. But before we start, we have some updates for the channel.
Cool beans?
Yeah, well, now before I start, I must apologize, Hermes. We got no questions this week. We will get to them next week. And no Astartes from Terra. I mean, this is kind of important. Just a heads up, we are getting rid of the commercials on YouTube. We never liked them to begin with, but it was the only way to make money other than memberships. But after running them for the course of about 8 months, we've decided that the dollar here or there isn't really worth putting you fine listeners through it.
Indeed, but if you guys really want to help us out, please sign on as a member on our YouTube channel, Tales of Ashraka. Right now we have 2 members who have been with us nearly since the start, and that would be Sir Bender Biden and Hermes Skirty, who we can't thank nearly enough.
Quite right, brother. But this month, if you sign on as a member, you can tell us what you would like to hear lore about, and we will schedule it into our section for a Vox.
That's right. Join our membership and just tell us what you want us to talk about. Like Hermes Skirty, who picked Dark Angels for next month's topic of conversation.
So, just to recap, we will no longer be running ads on this channel, and become a member and let us know what you would like us to talk about. But now on with the show. Now this week, like my brother said, we will be diving into the Siege of Helsreach, and I think it would behoove us to start with the hero of the story, Merek Grimaldus, Reclusiarch of the Black Templars.
Right you are, Zekdar. Now there are many people mentioned as defenders who participated in the Battle of Helsreach, or as the Black Templar referred it to as the Helsreach Crusade, but none stand out more than the hero of Helsreach, Reclusiarch Merek Grimaldus. Now, Merek is a veteran of a score of successful Black Templar crusades. His rise through the ranks of the chapter was meteoric, for he once stood as the youngest sword brother in the chapter's history.
Pardon me, brother.
Yes?
Don't you think we should tell people what Reclusiarchs, chaplains, and what the devil a sword brother is?
Actually, Zekthar, I was about to do so after I mentioned that he was soon raised from the martial sword brethren, inducted into the mysteries of the Reclusium after the Battle of Fire and Blood. This way, I could also mention what a martial is without breaking the flow so much.
Ah, I see.
Yes. Since we haven't really covered the Black Templars, I'll give you a brief explanation of what marshals and sword brothers are. Marshals are the second to the highest rank in the Black Templars and are in charge of crusades. The best comparison between them and other chapters is that they're company commanders. In other words, what most chapters would consider captains, but, their crusades aren't codex compliant.
So more like a wolf lord?
Kind of.
Okay.
We'll get to that more when we get into the Black Templars in the future. Now, sword brothers are basically a marshal's chosen guard. In most cases, they're veterans, but some, like Grimaldus, are chosen for their exceptional deeds that they have done. As for what a Reclusiarch is, it's a senior rank of a chapter's chaplaincy, aka the organization which manages chaplains, the spiritual and religious leaders of a Space Marine chapter, as well as testing the loyalty and purity of a Space Marine. On top of a normal chaplain's duties, the Reclusiarch also oversees the rituals pertaining to the holiest relics, as well as training new chaplains. They are also the immediate subordinates to the High Chaplain, aka as the Master of Sanctity.
Ooh.
who is in charge of the chapter's chaplaincy. Although we could go into much greater detail on the specifics of all this, I believe it will stray from our topic at hand.
Sure. I mean, we will eventually, anyways, talk about the Black Templars, and we'll get more into this.
Since we are both in agreement, let's return to Grimaldus' story. The chaplains were impressed by the faith and devotion to the emperor displayed by the young Grimaldus, for he had the markings of a powerful warrior priest. As a chaplain novitiate, he learned under the venerable and stern High Chaplain Mordred. The young chaplain took his vows before the shattered sword of dawn aboard the Black Templars flagship, the Eternal Crusader, and soon justified the chaplain's faith in him by zealously leading the warriors of the Black Templars in battle. Many times he suffered grievous wounds in the thickest of the fighting, but always steadfastly refused to succumb. Unlike many of his brother chaplains, Grimaldus preferred to inspire his warriors through deeds rather than through rhetoric. On those rare occasions when Grimaldus spoke, his voice commanded the attention of all around, the rarity of his speech ensuring not a single word went unheard. Grimaldus's oratory cut straight through his brother's warrior spirits. It was no surprise that, upon Mordred's death, the High Chaplain named Grimaldus his successor with his final breath. In 987.M41, the Shadow Wolves' homeworld of Veridon was ravaged by the foul Xenos of a Tyranid splitter fleet. The Shadow Wolves attempted to defend their homeworld from the predations of the merciless Great Devourer. Astropathic distress beacons were transmitted through the warp solar weeks before the attack, before their fortress monastery finally fell to the enemy. Chaplain Grimaldus and the Black Templars swiftly answered their brother chapter's summons and attempted to penetrate the swarms of Tyranids besieging the ruins of the Shadow Wolves' fortress monastery. But the unrelenting ferocity of the alien tide hampered their efforts. Grimaldus had been there at the end, standing witness to the actions of the handful of Shadow Wolves that remained, their blades broken and their bolters spent. They died in honorable battle as they made their defiant last stand, still intoning the litanies of hate against the alien, chanting their bitter fury at the foes even as they were annihilated. A lone Shadow Wolves battle brother, though horrendously wounded and on his knees beneath the chapter's standard, attempted to maintain his chapter's honor to the last. For the Shadow Wolves' war banner could not be allowed to fall, whilst one of the star days of the chapter yet lived. The doomed space marine held it aloft defiantly, keeping the banner upright and proud even as the Xenos creatures tore into him. He died in what Grimaldus could only describe as a beautiful death. What do you think of this stalwart warrior priest so far?
Well, what do you think of him so far? The only things that I've read of him chronologically, anyways, is actually at Helsreach.
Yeah.
I might not be the right guy to ask this question to, and I'll give you my 2 cents on him, but what do you think of this guy so far?
Well, for one thing, I think his idea of what is beautiful is messed up, but just my own opinion on that. I think the fact that he prefers to speak more through actions than words is something that I can get behind, because, there's a lot of people prefer the posturing over the actual actions, which, is all well and good and everything. But if you're an actual warrior in the thick of it, generally you want to, have somebody who, can actually do something by your side or do things well by your side. My first idea behind it is he's very zealous.
Well, he's a chaplain, so he should be. It's kind of part of the job description, right?
Yeah. And at least at this point in time, he seems like, because of how quickly he's rose and how many battles he's gone through and stuff like that, he may have a little bit of an ego. But
well, correct me if I'm wrong. By the time Hell's Reach hits, he's 135 or something like that.
He's definitely over 100. I think he's been. He becomes Reclusiarch just as he enters.
Just as they get to Armageddon, I knew that. But I
Yeah,
believe
and it's I believe after a century of being an ecclesiarch or something like that. I mean, being a chaplain or something like that.
Right. So he's not super young, but he's also not old, as we know, anyways, compared to other Astartes. So he's kind of maybe middle adolescent. I want to say, well, not adolescent, maybe young adult. Maybe that's where we put him.
Yeah, not long tooth, but not young.
Right. So that's your thought processes on him, is that he's an arrogant youngster,
and at this point in time, he sees things more in just black and white. But I think from what we know in general with Black Templars, that's how they see things generally, just black and white. not say it's because of their color scheme. It's not that.
Well, that might be one of the reasons why their color scheme is like that. Actually, no, it has to do with Sigismund. But yeah, there really isn't a whole lot of gray area for Black Templars. Well, my 2 cents, anyways, on Grimaldus and what I know about him, anyways, is that this is what I can say, anyways, beforehand. Before he gets to Armageddon and during the course of this thing, anyways, he's kind of a whiny brat. And he was put in this position as the Reclusiarch. He even thought, anyways, that it was kind of before his time. He shouldn't have stepped up and taken it, but because his protege had said he's ready for it as he's dying, which I don't know if really taking the words of a dying man is the best way to determine who gets the next spot, but that's what technically it wasn't like, well, he said so, that's what we're going to do. The chapter master and what did you call him anyways?
You mean the High Marshal?
Well, yeah, same difference. And then the marshals kind of got together and convened and like, well, who will be our next Reclusiarch? And they decided that what's his face anyways said it should be Grimaldus, and they were like, yeah, we'll go with that. But I mean, that's just kind of my 2 cents, is that he was advanced too quickly to that last spot. But throughout Helsreach, it really kind of drastically changes his character. But getting back to
here's one of my questions, though.
Okay.
This is just a random question, somewhat maybe obscure question that I'm not aware of.
Okay.
Is it because they didn't have enough marshals that they sent him as being in charge? Because marshals are also the ones that are in charge of that.
We'll get to that in a minute. First, let's go over, anyways, kind of the tactical importance of what Helsreach is. No, I'm actually going to I'll answer that question here in just a second.
Okay.
Now, after the Second War of Armageddon, Helsreach was refortified and prepped for any trouble in the future. It was surrounded by vast walls as tall as Titans, reinforced with artillery positions, and dotted with anti-air battery emplacements that could strike all but the largest of targets from the sky. In addition to these fortifications, it also enjoyed the protection offered by the waters of the Tempest Ocean. A key strategic value to the city was Hell's Highway, a colossal roadway linking the city to Hive and Furnace, leading into Helsreach and splintering into lesser ways throughout the entire city. Whoever controlled the highway can move armor and titans twice as fast as if they had to stalk through the hive towers and city blocks. For all intents and purposes, Hell's Highway was Helsreach's chief artery, its lifeline. If it was lost, the city would be overrun. Now, another important aspect are the docks on the eastern side of the hive. As long as they are operational, they are a route of escape for not just civilians, but a way for reinforcements to arrive if things get really hairy. Now, Imperial authorities were aware of the inevitable attack and used what little time and resources they had to reinforce the city. Helsreach was garrisoned by the 121st Armageddon Steel Legion under the command of Colonel Ensign. Sadly, however, the colonel died several solar weeks before the beginning of the war as a result of an augmentic heart infuser failure, only 6 solar months after he had received them. The second in command requested to his superiors that Colonel Saren of the 101st Armageddon Steel Legion take command of the Hive City's defense. The 101st was stationed at Hades' Hive, the place where Ghazghul Thraka was stopped during his first attempt to conquer the world, the city being a shadow of its former self, still ruined after the last war. Commissar York believed that because Ghazghul was defeated there, and since the Hive City could not offer the orcs a good fight, the orc warlord would order the hive obliterated from orbit, an assumption that later proved to be correct. Thus, York ordered the forces from Hades' Hive to be relocated, and as such, General Vladimir Kulrov, the overall commander of the Armageddon Steel Legion forces on the world, agreed to relocate Saren and his forces to Helsreach. In addition to these and other Austrian regiments, the city's defense force was bolstered with militia regiments formed from the Hive's inhabitants, both volunteers and conscripts. The Imperial Navy contributed to the city's defense as well, sending several aeronautical Imperial squadrons under Commander Corton Barasath to battle orc fighter bombers in the skies over Helsreach. The city was further bolstered by the arrival of the Space Marines of the Black Templars, Helsreach Crusade. The Black Templars came in great force to Armageddon, sending 3 crusades onto the surface and participating in the orbital naval battle, the purpose of which was to thin out orc forces prior to their landing on the planet proper, totaling 900 Astartes. 100 of those were sent to Helsreach under the command of Reclusiarch Grimaldus. The Space Marines, although expert warriors, proved to be problematic due to their outright contempt for lesser mortal humans, and due to their seeming inability to cooperate with other forces in the city to any relatable degree. This largely due to their commanding Reclusiarch's humors. Grimaldus had been only recently promoted to the rank of Reclusiarch following his master's death, as the last will of his tutor was that Grimaldus take up his mantle as Reclusiarch of the Eternal Crusade. The leaders of the chapter parleyed on the matter and decided to comply. Grimaldus himself was beset by doubt as he thought of himself as unprepared to assume and perform his master's duties as leader of the chapter. As Reclusiarch, he sought to emulate his predecessor and lived in his former mentor's shadow. In addition to this, he was deeply dissatisfied with his crusade to Helsreach, which he perceived to be nothing more than exile. He believed that he would die fruitlessly on this world, which was to be, in his opinion, the High Marshal's intention when he sent him there. All of this distributed to his disposition influenced his conduct and the decisions he took during the Battle of Helsreach.
So, to put it bluntly, he's kind of a pouty brat?
Well, that's how he kind of got started, yeah.
Ah.
So, real quick here anyways, you know how you asked anyways why he was in charge of Crusade Helsreach? It's because Helbrecht wasn't there. He was still up in space fighting the good fight.
Whereas he was sent down to the not-so-good fight, I guess.
Yeah. Well, the other 2 marshals, actually, I didn't really talk about them, but the other 2 marshals, Almeric and I can't remember the other guy, they ended up fighting across the entire astral wastelands. He was the only one, anyways, that got stuck on Helsreach because it's fairly important to the rest of, the planet. But anyways, I must mention, because they will be important to our story, that being a Reclusiarch, he came with his own honor guard, 5 knights to be precise. Arterion, Grimaldus' noble standard bearer, who originally was a pilot, who was known for his part of the Battle of Fire and Blood. At the end of the battle, while the fortress of Apex was collapsing around the last of the surviving Black Templars, Arterion was the last pilot to leave, allowing High Marshal Lodoldus, Reclusiarch Mordred, and Sword Brother Grimaldus to evacuate. Bestelid, Grimaldus' sergeant, whom the Reclusiarch noted for his humility, having stated that he had no desire to rise above the rank of sergeant and become a castellan or marshal. Cador, a sword brother and a veteran of many battles. He was a brother and friend to all in the squad, even Primus, the youngest sword brethren of the group. He had the arrogance of youth, cocky, and possessed of an independent streak which could prove dangerous. He was also boastful of his abilities, to the point that he openly referred to himself as a blade master. Now, despite this, Grimaldus believed that Primus' skills in combat backed up his words. And then there is Nerovar, also known as Nero, who was an apothecary of the squad and was the newest member of the unit. Now, the last of the Imperial forces to arrive in Helsreach was the Legio Invigilata, a third of the Titan Legion under the command of Princeps Majoris Zarha Mancion, was stationed a short distance north from the Hive City and was prepared to move out, although the Princeps had not yet decided whether the battle group would defend Helsreach or would be joining its kin in the Hemlock region. When Grimaldus learned of this, he contacted Valiant Corsimer, moderator primus of the Imperator-class Titan Storm Herald, and Zarha, Mancion's representative to Helsreach, and demanded to speak with the Princeps Majoris. The Xenos would inevitably bring their own Gargants into the fray, and without the Mechanicus Titans, Helsreach would be doomed. As such, when Grimaldus was refused, he decided to venture to the Legio Invigilata staging ground, and accompanied by several of his knights, and enforce an audience. When he arrived there, no one sought to stop him until he reached the feet of the Storm Herald, where a dozen Scutari denied them entry. Grimaldus and his Astartes were furious at such treatment of the Emperor's finest, and were prepared to destroy the Tech Guard. But in the last moment, the Princeps Majoris remotely ordered the Scutari to stand down and grant the Reclusiarch entry. When Grimaldus arrived at Mancion's command chamber, she bade him remove his helm so that they may speak face to face. When he complied, she mentioned something I might add more than one person mentions in this campaign. He had kind eyes, and to plainly state his request. The Reclusiarch asked if she would fight for Helsreach, and, for reasons known only to her, she agreed. 3 solar days later, the Hive City shook with the steps of God engines as the Titan battle group entered through the northern gates. The city was finally sealed and braced itself for the coming onslaught. And as night fell, the sky caught fire. Okay, before we carry on, there is an enemy guy that we do need to talk about here, Euxin. And he's one of your favorites, and I like him too. But we got to talk about Orchimedes, because he's going to keep popping up here just every once in a while.
Well, in a way, anyways, right?
It's pretty much anything that is big and nasty and mechanically built that goes up against Helsreach. Orchimedes kind of built it. Let's put it that way.
Or in general, pretty much everything that's almost everything has had his hand in it that's been on Armageddon, probably in one way or another.
Right. So why don't you tell us about the guy?
Okay, so from what little we know, one thing is that he was lent by some mysterious deal. We don't know what it is. He was given over to Gazgul by Nastrek. So by the fact that he's come out with all these inventions, we can assume that he's a big mech, but he is also considered one of the most notorious orcs because nobody actually knows what he looks like. Even the Physio Assassinorum can't nail him down, so it's just like, oh, great. How fun. Which is odd because if you think about it, orcs tend to stick out like a sore thumb in a lot of cases. You know, the bigger they are, generally the smarter they are and the more intelligent they are. You'd think that somebody that's done so much would be so big that he'd be a bit noticeable amongst the rest of them. But, you know, of course, he could also be stuck in a room somewhere going, what else can I make that will cause mass destruction?
Do you know if he took off with Gazgul?
We don't know for sure. It actually wouldn't surprise me if he did. And the reason why I say that is because I don't think there's been any mentions of any sort of new inventions or advancements on anything that's at Armageddon, which is kind of his thing. Because even after I believe he created the submersibles, later he ended up coming back in, improving upon them. So from what I remember from looking at the texts, anyways.
So it's either he went with Gazgul or the Officio Assassinorum actually finally caught up with him, and it's just been redacted.
They're still just they're quite curious and will probably pay quite a hefty reward for anybody who can figure out who the heck he is, first of all. And second of all, where he is. So in all likelihood, either he's either with Gazgul or he's
dead, right?
Dead or hidden somewhere.
Well, I mean, there's been no more advancements on Armageddon, it's either he went with Gazgul or mean, he's dead, I would think.
Yeah, more than likely. So I'd like to think that he isn't dead. Just on the standpoint of him still being around. Let's face it. First off, having the code name Orchimedes to me is just like awesome. I mean, we give an orc this name instead of like, oh yeah, the big mech that creates things. No, it is Orchimedes. I don't know, there's just something about that just appeals to me. But having a character like that just seems like, it's one of those things that you're just like, yes, the orcs have something else now. They actually have something other than we have Gazgul.
Well, except for the fact that he weighs that after Armageddon, he's never talked about again. So, guess what? You're back to just Gazgul.
Yeah. Maybe he ended up going back to Nasdrag.
That could be too. I guess that could be the other option.
Could have
that
been
he was only
a lens.
That he was only on loan for a period of time. Yeah, that could be too. Could be. Well, one I kind of find highly unlikely, just simply because, well, okay, we can't really get into too much of it anyways, but Nasdrag, at this point, if I recall right anyways, is on Medusa 5, and it's about to blow up. He doesn't die there, but he disappears into the warp, and they haven't seen him again since. So it would be weird anyways if he ended up back there. I'm not saying that it's impossible. I'm just saying it would be, the timeline would be kind of tight. Kind of like how Ulmric, one of the marshals that's on Armageddon, could very well be the Ulmric that we talked about during the Terra Crusade that followed around with Gilliman.
Yeah.
The problem is that timeline is really, really thin. So more than likely, it's somebody else. But
of course, on the other hand, it could be, since he's on loan, is like, okay, here's a ship. This is where we think the guy is. Go. So he's somewhere out there trying to find Helsreach.
Okay. But what's happening, more importantly, what's happening anyways with Helsreach?
The Xenos continued their attack until the second night threatened to fall, at which point they finally fled. Perhaps the great mounds of their corpses made them consider the futility of this attack, or perhaps some sudden realization came over them that there will be greater battles to join later. Horns blared across the wastelands, signaling a retreat that, apart from this sole signal, was completely chaotic and akin more to a rout. They were pounded by artillery even as they fell back, but soon even the stragglers escaped the mighty Organs' range, running back to their landing sites. Orc ships now covered the entire wasteland, some of them being as tall as the hive towers. The largest of these vessels disgorged the Goggins, the orc scrap titans created in the visage of the Xenos gods Gork and Mork. These would be the weapons that would bring down the walls. And these were the targets that the titans of the Legio and Vigilata had to engage. The Hive City was safe for the time being, however, and Grimaldus turned to pursue a different agenda. Now, the Reclusiarch learned of a large number of garrisoned ammunition depots and stations out in the wilderness. These were envisioned to be used when the Hive cities fell and needed to be reclaimed. But during his time amongst the Desert Vultures, the Steel Legion regiment, he learned of a legend concerning the world's past. The guardsman told him of an ancient, powerful weapon buried beneath the sands. This news gave Grimaldus hope for the first time since he arrived on Armageddon, and he decided to consult the Master of the Forge, Jerizian, of the Helsreach Crusade on the matter. Grimaldus had learned that one of the stations manned by the Armageddon Steel Legion in the wasteland surrounded Helsreach was a sealed Adeptus Mechanicus facility. The guardsmen were only positioned around the facility and had no access to its interior, as it was considered to be sovereign Mechanicus territory. Grimaldus was told that a deactivated relic from the First War for Armageddon was stored therein, but the exact nature of the device was kept secret by the tech priests of Mars, and not even Armageddon's high command had any knowledge of it. Grimaldus, like all of the Black Templars sent to Armageddon, had been schooled in the history of the world and its past battles, and possessed knowledge similar to the Armageddon Steel Legion's officers. Unlike his human allies, however, Grimaldus believed that the device impounded by the Adeptus Mechanicus was a powerful weapon, first constructed and deployed on Armageddon 6 standard centuries prior, the Ordinus Armageddon. Grimaldus had not cared for what caused the Adeptus Mechanicus to hibernate the weapon, and, more apparently, to not deploy it to the world's defense. His only concern was winning the war, and he believed that with this artifact, Helsreach might stand a chance against the greenskin onslaught. To this end, Grimaldus, alongside the master of the forge, Drisian, and adjutant Quintus Syria Tyro, Armageddon High Command liaison to Helsreach, who was brought along to deal with the Astra Militarum personnel around the installation, boarded one of the Black Templar Thunderhawks and made their way to the station, leaving the Knights of Dorn and Helsreach under the command of the Emperor's champion, Bayard. The three of them descended into the vast subterranean complex, which stretched several kilometers downwards and seemed to be completely vacant, with not a single guardian left to protect the facility. The Black Templars and the human accompanying them went forward, stopping only at a massive doorway blocking their path, allowing Drisian to work on opening them. Each of these gateways was 4 meters thick, and it would be implausible to try to open them with force, especially since, as Drisian noticed, such an action would be likely to activate the dungeon's manifold defense mechanisms, this being the reason why no biological or augmetic guards were required. The Master of the Forge succeeded in cracking the code safeguarding each consecutive barrier and forcing them to open, taking more and more time on each occasion as the code's sophistication grew progressively more complex the closer to the facility's heart they were placed. The penultimate barrier was opened a full 9 solar hours after they had entered the facility. But then their efforts were rewarded. On the final doorway, inscribed in letters as high as the Black Templar, was a single word, Oberon, the name of the hallowed Ordinatus Armageddon. This discovery, however, was of little immediate use, as the inner vault in which Oberon had lain slumbering was designed and built to withstand a direct orbital bombardment and even endure the world being condemned to exterminatus, while the door was sealed with at least 1 billion individual codes. Drisian had declared that it would take him no less than 9 solar days to overcome this safeguard, and requested for his servitors to be sent to him to assist in the task. Unable to help the Tech Marine in any other way, Grimaldus and Tyro returned to the service, and on their way back to the Hive City, they had received the news of Gazgul's most recent move. True to Yerik's predictions, the Orc had ordered Hades' Hive to be obliterated from orbit.
So, hang on a second. This is the great war machine the squats helped build, right? That we talked about a couple of weeks ago?
Actually, that was at I think it was actually called the Ordinatus Golgotha, which is kind of named after where it came from, which is Golgotha. This one is kind of connected to the squats, though, because you see, Oberon first shed blood during the massive Chaos Invasion during the First War of Armageddon. The Crone Bane Lords, a group of demon engines deployed for the Chaos Assault upon Armageddon, were instrumental in the destruction of many cities. But genius of the Adeptus Mechanicus, Chironomus Anderson, devised an Ordinatus as a defense against the marauding war machines. Anderson mounted a massive starship weapon onto a land-bound chassis, giving the Imperial forces an immense war machine powerful enough to destroy even the largest and most heavily armored foes.
Well, that doesn't sound like squat tech at all.
Oh, it doesn't? This idea was by no means original, and followed the concept behind the famous Squatch Titan killer known as the Cyclops. In the ensuing battle for Tardis Hive, Ordonnatus Armageddon destroyed no less than 4 Chaos Titans and 2 detachments of Demon Engines. A truly mighty weapon indeed.
I don't suppose you could tell me if he gets it operational, could you?
Oh yes, he does.
Awesome. But when? In that 9 days?
Patience.
Fine. Now, unfortunately, Zarha Mancion soon learned about the Reclusiarch's exploits and demanded his presence on the Storm Herald. The Ordonnatus Armageddon was a relic sacred to the cult Mechanicus, and could only be awakened by the Lord of the Centurio Ordonnatus. For its tomb to be infiltrated by outsiders, let alone for Oberon to be attempted to be reactivated without proper ministrations, was grave blasphemy to all followers of the machine god. Mancion had received orders from his superiors to either make the Reclusiarch abandon this course of action or to see him terminated. Despite her wrath, she attempted to convince Grimaldus to cease this quest, as it would tear Mechanicus' forces on the world apart, but to no avail. When the final threat had been spoken, the chaplain instead retorted with his own. He called 4 of his Thunderhawk gunships, which he had ordered to prepare for this action beforehand, to fly towards the Titan and acquire target locks on its bridge, allowing them to obliterate it long before the void shields could be raised if such an order was given. In the end, bloodshed was averted, as both sides reached a tense compromise. For the good of Helsreach, the Lord of the Centurio Ordonnatus was en route to Armageddon, and were he to arrive in time, the entire matter would be far less grave. In case he were not to, however, Jurizian would continue his labors unabated, even though he would likely be unable to activate the Ordonnatus. Although fragile, such an agreement allowed both sides to participate in the battle as allies, especially so since Jurizian's initial estimates appeared to be too optimistic. For the code protecting the artifact changed and evolved like a living being, and the master of the forge deemed it might take him solar months or even standard years to get the door open. Soon afterwards, the orcs and their newest reinforcements, arrayed with their massive gargants readied, were prepared to bring down the city walls. Guardsmen vacated the battlements before the inevitable shelling and took up positions in the streets and buildings. Soon the walls fell under the fury of the gargants, and the first Xenos Titans walked into the city, only to be blasted by the Imperial Guard engines. The first charge of the Greenskins was broken by the Black Templars under the Reclusiarch's command, but eventually the Astartes had to return behind Austrian military lines and let the true war of attrition begin. Every road was barricaded and manned by Armageddon Steel Legion troopers. Snipers would provide deadly support from rooftops. Battle tanks of every type drove through the streets, gunning down the Xenos as they poured into the hive cities. During the preparation for the battle, the populace was removed from the outlying sectors of the city to allow the soldiers the room to maneuver and withdraw. In the beginning of the siege proper, the guardsmen were to inflict as much damage on the enemy as possible before withdrawing to the next position, letting the Xenos purchase these worthless outskirts with their blood. During this time, Commander Barasat carried out his proposed plan to strike against the Orcs' aerial capabilities. Earlier, he attempted to convince Colonel Saren to allow him to execute what was essentially, in essence, a suicidal attack. He planned to engage in dogfights above the bulk of the Orc forces and allow bombers to break through and perform bombing runs on enemy airstrips. Not only would this deprive the Greenskins of any meaningful air power in the beginning stages of the battle, but also any aircraft to be shot down, likely all committed to the action, would fall down upon enemy forces and contribute to increasing their casualties rather than allied if they were to fight over the city. Saren was initially reluctant to agree. However, upon hearing false assurance that Grimaldus had endorsed this maneuver, which he never did, he allowed for his action to take place. Soon after, Barasat's wings were flying over the plains before Helsreach, and although his forces succeeded in their endeavor, they were predictably overcome. At this point, one thing should be noted of Princeps Majoris Zarha Mancion. The Storm Herald's machine spirit was resentful at being bound to its princeps, and for the long years of their enforced cooperation, it had patiently weakened Mancion's mental resolve, seeking to finally drown her in its mindscape, an effort only made easier as she aged.
Huh?
Okay. I know this sounds kind of confusing, but there are two parts to how a Titan functions. Well, okay, there's actually a lot more than two parts there. But the two basic parts on how the computer works in a Titan. The Princeps, aka Titan pilots. Brain is connected to a self-aware computer that is the Titan. This way, the human can command and control the master machine, all the while the computer can react and run faster than the human brain as to what needs to be done.
So, like an AI, the pilot is connected to an AI?
Oh, no. I mean, that would be ridiculous and heresy. The Princeps is connected to the machine's spirit that happens to be sentient.
Right.
Anywho, Princeps are people of exceptional willpower, which is required to enter a mind link with a Titan, maintain their sanity intact amidst the roaring spirit of destruction housed within the Titan's adamantium hull.
So what you're saying is because of her age, she's having problems keeping control of the AI, machine spirit?
Precisely. That, and apparently the machine spirit of the Titan really didn't like her. Anyways. Yeah. I don't know what it takes anyways to piss off a giant, 10-story tall machine spirit. But
maybe connecting them to Adeptus Mechanicus person?
Good point.
Just in general.
Anywho, the Titan's efforts cause Mansion to lack complete control of her thoughts. The flood of the Titan's mental gestalt, making her undertake brazen actions. The first such occurrence took place when one of the Legio Invigilata's god engines fell. The Reaver-class Titan Draconian fell to a crude orc trap, which brought the great war engine down and allowed the greenskins to butcher its crew. The Titan's death cry rang through the MIU manifold, and through the medium that was the Storm Herald's machine spirit, cast Mansion into a vengeful sorrow. While still partly under the control of the Titan's machine spirit, Mansion's war engine strode ahead of her screening force and Skastari escort in an attempt to avenge the Draconian and its crew, only to fall into the similar orc trap moments later. The damage inflicted by the greenskins and the shame of defeat caused her to loosen her grip on the recalcitrant Titan's machine spirit and be very nearly overwhelmed by it. The Titan and his Princeps would have been lost had it not been for the intervention of the Black Templars strike force under the command of Reclusiarch Grimaldus. The Astartes cleansed the god engine of Xenos' taint, and their chaplain helped Zarha Mansion emerge from the psychic maelstrom that is a Titan's mental landscape. The Princeps, however, was by no means unscathed by the experience. The city's defense carried on, and throughout the following days, Imperial forces retreated steadily, according to plan, whittling down the advancing tide of greenskins, setting up ambushes, performing pincer maneuvers against assailants, encircling those orc elements that proved too brazen in destroying them, but retreated nonetheless. The city stood against impossible odds, and having it endure siege warfare for as long as it did was no small feat in itself. Colonel Saren had all the right to color his bitterness with a sense of pride when, on the 18th solar day of the battle, he voxed the last command to be issued from the Central Command Spire before it was abandoned. All units in Omega Sector, Subsector 9, the location where the line was breached for the first time, were to be abandoned fallback orders and retreat to contingency positions. The enemy had reached Hell's Highway. Such a development was grave news for the Imperial forces. The orcs possessed a great advantage in numbers, and with the access to Hell's Highway, they were able to bring this might to bear much more quickly and efficiently than they otherwise would. To this, sadly, the defenders had no answer, and were only capable of delaying the advancing greenskin forces, holding a junction or a choke point for several solar days before it was finally lost and the forces had to retreat, falling back all the quicker than ever before. As the original plans predicted, once Hell's Highway was lost, it was only a matter of time before the hive fell. In just over 2 solar weeks after the highway was reached for the first time by the greenskins, the city and its defenders were devastated. The orcs had ravaged full half of the hive city's territory. The Ostra Militarum and the militia regiments were reduced to a fraction of their original sizes. And the 100 Black Templars that comprised the Helsreach Crusade, 25 lay dead. And of this number, gene seeds from only 13 were able to be recovered. Even the mighty god engines of the Legio Invigilata suffered losses of their own. Now, it also must be noted here that during this time, Cador was slain in an orc ambush, much to the despair of Nero. On the 36th solar day of the battle, the situation the city found itself in proved to be far worse than expected. All of a sudden, contact with the Valdez oil platforms became erratic, as if there was a storm raging over the Tempest Ocean. But there wasn't one. Initially, the Imperial authorities in Helsreach believed that Vox transmissions were being jammed. They did not know by what. According to their expectations, the orcs should be unable to reach the Valdez oil platforms, even with their air forces. Communications were only made worse by the fact that the stations were understaffed. Platforms Jehannam and Shoal collapsed into the dark waters, their crews never realizing what truly caused their demise. The third, largest and fully staffed platform, Lucifus, was able to identify the threat and relay the information to Helsreach, but could do little to save itself. The new force bearing down on the hive turned out to be a fleet of at least 300 orc submersibles, carrying tens of thousands of new orc warriors, due to arrive in 2 solar hours' time.
Foiled again by Archimedes!
Indeed. This was the exact reason why the Greenskins had touched down in the Deadlands of Armageddon in the first place. They spent over a solar month tearing down their landing craft and constructing a mighty fleet to deal an entirely unexpected blow against the coastal hive cities. Helsreach was not the only target, for a detachment of nearly the same size as the one dispatched there was sent to the hive Tempestus. Tempestus was a hive city half the size of Helsreach, with only half of its defensive capabilities, and this news spelt its inevitable doom. Helsreach itself was not in much better of a position. Areas under Imperial control were centered around the very middle of the city and the docks, the latter being a vital part of infrastructure still in Imperial hands, and an important command center after the abandonment of the headquarters spire. More than that, Helsreach docks housed the majority of the hive city's civilian shelters, located within the quarter or underneath it. These shelters housed a total of 60% of the hive city's population during wartime, and losing them to the Xeno savages would result in a staggering loss of life and manpower. A successful orc seaborne strike against the docks would break the back of the Imperial resistance and cause the hive city to fall within solar hours. Imperial commanders were desperate to not let this happen and quickly considered their options. The docks were crowded with menials and cramped with supplies. As such, would be impossible to transfer troops in time. Workers would also obstruct the guardsmen in their actions in any way, and there was no possibility to evacuate the menials, let alone the populations housed in the shelters. It was proposed to use the main highway route to send the troops into the central docks and evacuate the workers through secondary veins. But even this would be folly, as moving any forces from the battered front immediately would see the hive city fall either way. At this point, Helsreach docks master Tomaz Macronus requested that he and his workers, nearly 40,000 laborers in total, be armed using the city's excessive small arms stockpile, and that they could be used to buy the time necessary to reorganize defensive lines across the city.
Can we stop right here for a second and just take in how awesome these guys are?
Yeah. And none of these guys are soldiers. They're all just dock workers. You remember in the Second War of Armageddon, something very similar happened anyways on Helsreach, where the dock workers ended up, They ended up welding themselves inside the giant cranes, and they ended up doing battle with the Gargants.
Not Helsreach.
No, it was Helsreach.
I thought it was where Yerrick was.
No, that's Hades. Hades didn't have any docks. Helsreach. This is kind of the same mentality, though, but this time, anyways, I mean, they're just like literally, they're the last line of defense are these dock workers. They have no training at all in anything military. They are literally, anyways, everything that the Astra Militarum and the Adeptus Astartes truly hate. Have no combat experience. They are like it's not even worth giving them a gun, guys. That's normally the way that they kind of look at it. These are worse than even the PDF kind of thing. So the fact, anyways, that A, they stood up and said, you know, we'll take on this responsibility, and B, they actually, I'm about to say here in a minute, anyways, actually kind of pardon my French, they kind of kick ass. They hold the line, which is really impressive.
Well, first off, they are dockmen of a industrial plant for one thing, so they would have to be beast of people to begin with. Think about it.
Yeah, I would say, anyways, in their defense, these would be the guys that the Austrian militarum would walk by and be like, I wish anyways that you guys had joined the Austrian militarum.
Yeah.
You were quite the human specimen, there, sir.
But
Lifting that giant oil truck.
you do a better job at your current job than becoming a soldier. Sorry. Dang it. Move along.
But yeah. But yeah, like I said, anyways, these are the guys that they're civilians, but they stand up anyways. They say, you know what, we'll take on this responsibility, and they do a good job. Although
I was like, and let's face it, there's so many greenskins. How can we miss?
I will state anyways, though, that not a whole lot of them lived.
Well, how many of them were there? Like 40,000?
40,000, yeah.
Yeah, that's like a drop in the bucket when facing against the mass of the greenskins.
Well, it's not only that, but it's a drop in the bucket compared to anyways of how many people are probably still left on Helsreach.
Yeah.
Helsreach anyways you're talking about a multi-billion populace. I mean, Helsreach was about the size of, I want to say, it was about the size anyways of Hades during the Second War, right? They're pretty comparable, I wanted to say. It's a major hive. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
It's a major city. But unfortunately, like I said anyways, the Austrian military officers were reluctant to allow it, as the menials would likely be butchered within minutes. And if the hive city were to ever survive the war, it would need a qualified workforce to continue to exist. But seeing no other way, however, Colonel Saren agreed for this plan to commence. The newly formed Dockman militia was organized into 50 trooper platoons, each commanded by an Armageddon Steel Legion veteran stormtrooper, who was airdropped onto the docks, thereby ensuring that the untrained civilians performed to the best of their ability. To provide some degree of support for the militia, Sentinels and Hellhounds were moved to the docks. In addition, a force of Black Templars under the Reclusiarch's command was transferred via Thunderhawks to the docks in order to reinforce the front in critical points, and to inspire the militiamen in the face of the coming onslaught with the presence of the Emperor's Angels of Death. Soon enough, the first orc submersibles crashed into the docks, and the greenskins they disgorged advanced, only to be met by las fire from the hastily occupied Imperial defensive positions. After this initial surprise, however, the orcs assaulted with full force, and the Imperial defenders, even with this starry support, had no choice but to engage in the same fighting retreat as the one occurring throughout the city. Although Imperial defenders were on the brink, the point still stood. On the 37th solar day of the siege, the sun rose over a still, unconquered city.
In the meantime, more good news. As Master of the Forge, Drizian succeeded in breaking the code defenses of Oberon's inner sanctum and gained entry into the tomb. And Ordinatus, however, is a very sophisticated machine requiring the staffing of dozens of Skitarian tech priests specially raised for this task since birth.
Yes! It's time to load up and roll out! Right?
Not quite yet. Drizian, as he was alone, was only able to restore basic and slow locomotion of the relic's weapons, gravitational suspensor generators, was only able to make the great cannon fire once every 20 minutes. All of the other systems, including the machine's void shield generators, were inactive. Nevertheless, Drizian proceeded to move the Ordinatus towards Helsreach.
Well, back at Helsreach, near the docks, the best news was heard over the Vox.
Emergency signal from the Serpentine in orbit. She requests immediate cessation of all anti-air weaponry in the docks district.
In shell shock, Colonel Saren sat forward in his chair. There was barely any anti-air power left in the docks district. That wasn't the point. What did you say?
The Serpentine Astarte strike cruiser, sir. She requests...
Throne, send the order! Send the order! Deactivate all remaining anti-air turrets in the docks district. Around him, the tank's crew were silent, waiting, watching. Saren breathed a single word, almost fearful, giving voice to what would shatter the possibility, if it was true. Reinforcements.
Meanwhile, as the siege of Helsreach was going on, the war in orbit never truly ceased. Although the space battle was lost in the first days of the invasion, and the combined Imperial Navy and Adeptus Astartes fleet elements were forced to retreat, they did not abandon the world. Every few solar days, the fleet under either Admiral Perot's or High Marshal Helbrecht's command would translate out of the warp in close vicinity to the besieged planet, strike at the weakest point of the Xenos Armada, and bleed the greenskins however possible before escaping once again. Imperial naval assets could not face the Orc fleet in outright battle, or send reinforcements to the world with any certainty that they would reach the ground, and instead had to resort to such attritional warfare. However, Chapter Master Tushon of the Salamanders chapter, whilst battling along the river Hemlock on the planet, heard of Helsreach's plight and of the Black Templars' valor in defending the populace of the city. He demanded that the risk be taken and that reinforcements be sent down into the Hive City, and as Astartes carried out his will during one of the aforementioned naval attacks, a single strike cruiser of the chapter requested from Helsreach Command the cessation of anti-air fire in the docks district and ran the gauntlet of enemy fire to release drop pods and Thunderhawk gunships from a safe distance. The Salamanders, under the command of Sergeant Vreth, arrived in Helsreach, 70 in number, to aid the defenders. However, the majority of their chapter fought in the Hemlock region alongside the Legio Ignatum and Legio Invigilata. The Salamanders' fight was there, and they would not stay in the city indefinitely. They were called down only to help secure the docks quarter and protect the civilian populace.
So, real quick, Legio Invigilata. I wonder if they like the gelata. But
They're the Adeptus Mechanicus.
yeah, so probably not.
No.
Hakuna Matata. This ought to be hotter. Sorry. Anyways, we have talked about this at length for a few boxes now. The difference between the Salamanders and the Black Templars, but I think it was put best in a discussion between Primus and Battalion, scribed and chronicled by Aaron Dembski-Bowden. And they said, "There's nothing to like in them," Primus spat as he paced the prayer room. "They wage war to defend, to preserve. Everything their way is devoted to maintaining what humanity already has." Bastillion was sharpening his combat blade, running a whetstone along the gladius's killing edges. The small chamber was filled with Primus's crunching bootsteps and the whetstone scraping. "It is flawed," the swordsman added. "I mean no offense to them as warriors, but drop potting into the city purely to defend civilians? It's madness." "Why don't you answer, brother?" "I have little to say." "Do you think ill of me for my beliefs? Bastillion, please, you know I am right." "I knew you were treading on unstable ground. Do not besmirch the honor of our brother chapter. The Salamanders shed as much blood as we did this last week." "That is not the point." "That is where you and I disagree, brother. But you are young. You will learn." Primus didn't bother to hide his disgusted sneer from infecting his voice. "Do not patronize me, old man. You know what I speak. You're disquieted by the mounting years and too reserved to say it out loud." "I'm not that old." The boy was annoying, but he certainly knew how to drag out a smile or two with his misguided fervor. "Don't laugh at me, and stop making me laugh. What two chapters fight the same? What two chapters wage war according to the same principles? We're all born of different worlds and trained by different masters. Accept the differences and stand with them as allies. But they are wrong. Primus stared at the older warrior in disbelief. How could we be so obtuse? They could have landed anywhere in the city. They could have struck at one of the alien commanders. Instead, they crashed down amongst us at the docks within the humans.
That is why they came. Do not mistake their compassion for tactical idiocy.
That's my point. Primus resisted the rising urge to draw his blade. There was nothing to cut beyond the air before him, yet he felt a keen need to draw steel. They preserve. They defend. We are Astartes, not Imperial Guard. We are the spear thrust to the throat, not the blunt anvil. We are all that remains of the Great Crusade, Bastilian. For 10,000 years, we and we alone have crusaded to bring the Emperor's worlds into compliance. We do not fight for the people of the Imperium. We fight for the Imperium itself. We attack.
Not here. Not at Helsreach.
Primus lowered his head, unwilling to concede the point, despite the fact he knew he was defeated. That bastard Bastilian always did this to him. A few quiet words, and he'd puncture all of what Primus was trying to say. It was far, far beyond annoying. Helsreach's swordsman's voice was lower now, less bitter, and somewhat less confident. Nothing about this war has felt right.
Okay, so this is a very good example of showing the difference between the two. Well, the aspect of Black Templars versus how the Salamanders see things. There's another conversation that actually happens between Grimaldus and the sergeant that's in charge. It's also very...
Before you get to that, I will say, anyways, the thing that I really like about this passage is quite frankly, anyways, Bastilian's just no nonsense concept of just like, look, we're different. Move on with your life, man.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, at this point, anyways, that's kind of how I feel a little bit about it because it keeps getting brought up. But
oh, don't worry, it will come back even if we try.
We'll talk about the Black Templars, and it'll be like, what do you think about the Black Templars and the Salamanders? Yeah, okay.
There you go. Anything like them.
But what you're about to talk about here, anyways, is actually it's probably the more poignant conversation that you get from Helsreach and what's his face, Aaron Dembski Boden's scribing, and it's like you said, anyways, it's Vrath and Grimaldus, anyways, talking to each other right before Vrath is about to leave the city. Yeah. But anyway, sorry, go ahead.
So basically they end up coming to this conversation more towards the head where during the conflict, Grimaldus says, what we should have done is just pressed forward instead of defending this place, because then we could have gone to the war boss. And mind you, this is supposition on his part that they would actually be able to reach the war boss. But in all likelihood, it would happen.
Well, he thinks so, at least. Grimaldus.
Yeah. And then Vrath is just like, but see, here's the problem. If we did that, it would leave the entire population vulnerable to attack and undefended completely.
With Grimaldus firing back, well, they weren't attacked. And which Salamander responds like, well, that's because we held that position.
Yeah, we were there.
Yeah. So, yeah, and about the secondary forces coming around them. The conversation's very interesting to me is because, first off, anyways, it's written in the aspect of Grimaldus, not the Salamander. And not only that, but it's the aspect of how different, anyways, that they're, like you said, anyways, how different their concepts of fighting are. The Templars are always, like you said, they're the limitless crusaders. They're always attack. As opposed to the Salamanders, who are always, anyways, the bulwark of defense against humanity. So defend.
Is even more poignant in the fact that also in the conversation, he basically goes, all this was a waste of resources.
Yeah, ammunition, men,
stuff like that. And the Salamander on the other side is like, the way I see it is, this is a win.
Yeah, we saved the people.
And kept the docks, you know.
By the way, the end of the conversation is probably one of my favorites because Grimaldus, anyways, none too politely just says, "Get out of my city." He's just done talking with him. He keeps trying to get him to see his point. And the salamander is just as stubborn as Grimaldus is in his own way of doing things. So they eventually just come to a head and he's just like, get out.
It's like, and here's the other thing is that one of the things I want to say as a salamander is I'm just also following orders.
Right.
My orders were protect the civilians, not charge.
Defend the city. Yeah, exactly.
And hope
now, there is
war bosses there.
So during that conversation, anyways, or right before that conversation, there is actually a third opinion. By the way, the guy who wrote the book Helsreach does a very good job, anyways, letting whoever's reading this, he scribed it very well on the aspect of you can kind of make up your own mind, anyways, on who was right and who was wrong. I mean, it leans a little bit more on Grimaldus' side, just simply because Grimaldus is the one that you're covering throughout most of this, but he does it in a way, anyways, that you can see both sides, anyways, the value of both sides.
Yeah.
But there is a third person there, anyways, and that is Colonel Saren. And right before this, anyways, it is described, anyways, Saren glanced between the two Astartes, the warrior and the knight. He could not doubt the value of the Templars in the past weeks, but throne. If only he'd had the salamanders here. They were everything the Templars were not. Communicative, supportive, reliable. So to me, anyways, there is this third aspect, and there's a reason why humanity likes the salamanders. It's because they actually, like work with humanity. That is one of the things that I think Grimaldus really is, by this point in the campaign, really at fault in.
Yeah.
He still is under the
communication.
The
Communicate.
He's still under the concept, anyways, that he has to deal with these lowly mortals. And that's really not the case if you stop and think about it. These lowly mortals have to deal with this pompous, arrogant brat.
It's like, there's only 100 of you. We're facing off against so many more people than you are.
And there's millions of us. So,
the same forces that he's belittling are having to face off more people than he is because there's just so many more of them that have to hold the line.
Oh, and by the way, around this time, or maybe it was a little bit before this, anyways, Grimaldus, though, his thinking by this point is starting to shift a little bit. And one of the reasons why is because probably we don't unfortunately have time to talk about him, but one of my favorite characters in the whole book ends up saving his neck, and he is a Steel Legion stormtrooper, and it's Andrei Valatok. And he ends up saving Grimaldus. Him and a bunch of dock workers end up saving him and his squad. So there's kind of this, at this point, there's some, Grimaldus is kind of struggling because it's like, wow, even these puny mortals ended up saving me, and some of them aren't even trained,
At the same time, man, I had to be saved by these untrained, unworthy people.
Exactly. So he's, at this point, anyways, there is a couple things, anyways, that are kind of fighting in his mind at this point. But I think we've kind of talked the salamanders and the Black Templar differences to death here a little bit. But I think we're done with this, right? Until we talk about the Black Templars. Right. Anyways, if we could get back to the action.
Yes, getting back to the action. Although their stay was temporary, the Salamander's aid proved to be vital. Over the following days, Imperial forces battled against the seaborne invaders, and with the help of nearly an entire company of Astartes, they succeeded in breaking the assault and in dispersing the Xenos. Without the Salamander's valor, many more lives would have been lost, and perhaps even the city would have fallen. However, although the docks were not lost, for all intents and purposes, they were gone. In addition to losing 40,000 soldiers in 4 solar days, almost all of the city's industry was ground into the bedrock. And once the fighting for the docks finished, the salamanders left the city and returned to the Hemlock region, as per their master's request. Although the Hive City had survived the seaborne assault and the battle up to this point, the High Command simply did not possess enough forces to hold large swaths of territory and maintain a broad front. In accordance with Commissar Yerek's orders, units in Helsreach were to follow the same pattern used in other Hive cities. Whatever forces remained were to converge on the main population centers and strategically important locations such as the Azul spaceport or the Temple of the Emperor Ascendant, defending them until the end finally came to tie up as much of the orc strength as possible. The Hive City was declared lost, and the only thing left to protect was its population.
Well, during the final days of the battle, the bulk of the Legio Invigilata. I keep thinking of Pumbaa now. Would you like some gelada? This ought to be hotter. I got a matata! And Makuna Matata. Well, during the final days of the battle, the bulk of the Legio Invigilata battle group present in Helsreach was fighting alongside Armageddon Steel Legion elements in the burning Rosteric Ironworks district. The Titans were embattled in the area for 4 solar days, having lost 7 war engines over the course of a solar week. The Titan crews and the God engines themselves were exhausted from fighting and required rearming and retrofitting. This took its toll on the war engine's performance, particularly the Storm Heralds, which was already acting unreliably under the shaky guidance of its princeps. The Titans sought to retreat to their bulk landers for maintenance, but Princeps Majoris Mancion agreed to only do so after identifying an unusually large heat signature appearing in the inferno consuming the city. She sent forward 2 of her Warhound-class Titans to investigate. When the Princeps of these war machines closed in on the target, the first of them was obliterated without even realizing what had caused its demise. The same fate befell its colleagues soon after, but the latter caught a glimpse of the monstrosity, an enormous mega-gargant known as the Godbreaker, a giant machine easily dwarfing the Storm Herald. That's actually saying something. Storm Herald is an Imperial-class Titan. They are a giant chapel with guns.
And let me know, I can't think of a better name for a gargant than Godbreaker.
Yes. The Storm Herald soon faced the mechanical monstrosity, as the Gargant's crew wished nothing else but to challenge the greatest opponent in their path. It destroyed the smaller God engines comprising the Storm Herald's screen with ease, and was advancing upon the weakened Imperial-class Titan to end its existence with melee weapons. Mancion, because of the damage inflicted upon her Titan and the resulting psychosomatic pain and wounds she suffered in the MIU, was nearly completely useless, and the war engine was operated by Moderati, Lone, and Valiant Corsimer. Their only chance to finish the Mega Gargant with a single, final shot of the Imperator Titan's Plasma Annihilator. Corsimer decided to fire the Plasma Annihilator as soon as it recharged against Moderator Lone's advice, without waiting for the Titan's tech adepts to bring the weapon stabilizers back online. Because of this, the barrel trailed off target under the force of its shot, and the searing projectile it spewed out missed the giant Xenos Walker, thus sealing the Storm Herald's fate. Princeps Maximus Mansion's resolve was the only factor that had pledged the Legio Invigilata battle group to Helsreach's defense, and when she was destroyed, along with her Imperator Titan, the new acting commander of the Legio forces on Armageddon, Princeps Masset, had ordered the God engines to withdraw from the Hive City and rejoin the bulk of the Legio along the river Hemlock. Meanwhile, the remnants of the Black Templar Helsreach Crusade, 35 Astartes in total, chose the Temple of the Emperor Ascendant in the Ecclesiarchy district of Hive Helsreach as their final stand. The temple was the first place of worship erected by the original colonists in Helsreach and housed a number of sacred relics, including the colonists' charter. The Space Marines met with the Sisters of Battle of the Order of the Argent Shroud.
Who?
Savannah's girls.
Ah, yes. And if you folks don't know who that is, check out our voxes on the Adeptus Sororitas.
Anyways, the Order of the Argent Shroud, whose priority was located in the temple, and with the surviving Armageddon Steel Legion units that retreated to the location. In addition, using the temple's short-range Vox systems, Grimaldus ordered any Helsreach forces receiving the message to fall back to the Temple of the Emperor Ascended to make their final stand against the Orcs. Now, Orc forces massed and assaulted the temple not long after, carefully approaching the walls that surrounded the cathedral and the massive graveyard surrounding it, only to discover that the bulk of the Imperial defenders took up positions throughout the cemetery. As they had for a solar month, guardsmen began mowing down the advancing horde with lasfire, the Astartes fighting amongst them, engaged in vicious melee. The human defenders had little chances against the numerically superior greenskins, and as solar minutes passed, they fell back closer and closer to the temple. The Sororitas did not participate in the battle taking place in the graveyards. Their task was to guard the cathedral and delay the Xenos when they finally reached the doorway. During the fight, however, the Black Templars' Emperor's champion fell, leaving his sacred war gear in the hands of the Orcs. Such sacrilege could not be stomached by the Space Marines, and they fought ever more fiercely to recover it, with Grimaldus appointing another of his knights as the new champion, one Primus. Now, during this time, the Mega Gargant Godbreaker, which after felling Storm Herald had roamed the city and lent its might in obliterating any remnants of the Imperial forces, took course for the Temple of the Emperor Ascended. Such firepower would obliterate the Imperial defenders in solar minutes, as they had no answer to defend against any Orc constructs of that size.
Now, the only weapon capable of countering the Mega Gargant was the Ordinatus Armageddon, piloted by Jurizian. The Tech Marine was encountered by the Legio Invigilata Titans commanded by Princeps Amasat as they retreated from Helsreach.
Okay. Please tell me this is when it shows up and it finally does something. Huh?
Patience. As mentioned before, the Ordinatus had been awakened improperly by the Space Marine, and because of this, most of its systems were inactive. And the Noah cannon that constituted its main armament could only be made to fire once every 20 solar minutes. Grimaldus ordered Jurizian to not endanger the Ordinatus and bade him to take only one shot with its great weapon once he reached Helsreach, to be aimed at the Godbreaker. Amasat took his God Engine and 2 Warhound-class Titans to protect the blessed weapon and set forth for Helsreach once more. When they arrived, Amasat decided that the best way to protect the Ordinatus was to offer it a clear shot at the Orc Mega Gargant. To this end, Amasat ordered the 2 smaller Titans to protect the weapon and moved to lure the lumbering Xenos war machine out. Amasat succeeded in drawing the colossal Mega Gargant to him, although he died in the process. His sacrifice, however, allowed the Ordinatus Armageddon to fire and obliterate the Godbreaker. Their task complete, the Ordinatus and the Titans finally retreated from Helsreach. Very anticlimactic. Would you agree?
That's it? We waited this entire time? Well, I mean, it did kill Godbreaker. It's a good point. But, I mean, this, however, was merely a boon, not a deliverance. And before long, the Black Templars and their Austromilitarum allies found themselves pressed against the gates of the temple, and the Sororitas joined them in the struggle. What remained of the little force defending the holy place was butchered as it was pushed inside the temple. One by one, the guardsmen, the Sororitas, and the Astartes were hacked down by the Orcs. Grimaldus was the last surviving Black Templar, and shortly before his final demise, he witnessed the temple of the Emperor Ascendant collapsing under the stress it had been subjected to during the fight, thus crushing all the Xenos who dared defy its holy ground.
Now, although the Orcs made enormous progress against the Imperial defenders at Hive Helsreach and had the city at their mercy, ultimately they did succeed in conquering it. 2 solar months after the battle had begun, the fight was interrupted by the dawning of Armageddon's season of fire, climatic phenomenon during which the planet witnesses the fury of its many volcanoes and the surface is showered with noxious ash. These conditions made virtually all combat operations impossible to carry out, and forced both sides to seek shelter. The orcs remained in portions of the Hive City, but the rest retreated to their footholds or scurried away into underground openings. This allowed the Imperium to regain control around vital areas of the Hive City that they held. Now, despite normal belief, several people actually survived the collapse of the Temple of the Emperor Ascendant, notably amongst them Reclusiarch Grimaldus, the only surviving Black Templar, who, thanks to his power armor and apparently sheer willpower, raised himself from the rubble, carrying the Imperial relics housed within the destroyed temple. He was taken aboard the Eternal Crusader, the Black Templars' flagship, to be examined by the chapter's apothecaries, and gifted with the relics he recovered to carry Helsreach memory and honor in the Eternal Crusade. Shortly thereafter, Grimaldus came back to the Hive City and returned the relics to its surviving citizens. For his service to the people of the city, he was declared the hero of Helsreach. Imperial commanders hailed the Battle of Helsreach as a victory, but in point of fact, it was far from it. Although the Imperium retains control of the Hive City for the time being, large areas of the city still bear the stain of orc presence. Armor units have been dispatched to destroy orc rocks to the northeast of the city, but the orcs within the Hive remain a constant threat, in particular those who have scurried into the Maze, a system of tunnels and pipelines located underneath Hell's Highway. Entrances to the Maze were opened by the falling Xeno spacecraft in the beginning of the war, and the orcs took advantage of these rents in the ground to find shelter for the season. The majority of the Maze workforce is dead, and Imperial authorities do not know if the Xenos are capable of using the underground tunnels to relocate throughout the city. In order to diminish the threat of orc attacks, the Imperium has begun utilizing a new chemical agent, a neurotoxin crafted to be used as a weapon against the greenskins. To some effect. Entire groups of orcs have been found dead after the release of this weapon. How stable the compound is has yet to be ascertained. Tests on recovered orc carcasses reveal 7% range of genetic mutation in the DNA structure of afflicted greenskin cells, which translates into acceptable 1% chance of the toxin mutating to human lethal levels. In addition to its still contested status, the Hive City took staggering damage. As it is now, its population, in particular qualified worker cadres, is decimated. Its industry is essentially non-existent. Currently, Hive Helsreach possesses an estimated 5% of its original industrial capacity. And with both the docks and Hell's Highway inoperable, the only reliable connection the Hive City has with the rest of the world is through air transport. Helsreach was an important Hive City of Armageddon due to its production of promethium fuel and due to it being the only major port on the coast of the Tempest Ocean. As an industrial production center is now utterly worthless.
Well, we knew this one was going to be a little bit longer. Before we take off, what are your thoughts on Helsreach and the siege of Helsreach?
I think even towards the end, Grimaldus has some issues, personally.
Okay.
Well, it's just like, even at the end, he's just like, I'm calling anybody who can hear this to come to the temple instead of, whatever areas are possible to protect that need to be protected. No, everybody, the temple. Who cares?
Okay.
Neither here nor there. Well, it's just like, okay, we protect the civilians as one of the people that are supposed to be protected. But, if you're within range of the boxes, nah, come over here. Anyways.
Though in his own words, anyways, he did say at the very end of the book, he said, and I wonder now as they chant my new title, what they will decide to do with the relics. Hero of Helsreach, the crowd cheers, as if there is only one. So to me, anyways, that kind of, his character arc definitely, anyways, starts out, like we mentioned before, kind of an arrogant brat.
Yeah.
And while, yes, I don't think that he is completely changed, like you said, anyways. I mean, this is like, we make our last stand here at the cathedral. Won't you join us?
Through everybody else.
Ah, there wasn't. Okay, in his defense, there wasn't much left either of Helsreach at that point. It was one of the locations, anyways, where
One
people were
of
going back to. So it
three
wasn't like
locations.
what's that?
One of three locations.
Yeah, one of
of
three
them being
locations.
a population location, where the majority of the populace was.
Right? Which, as we already know, anyways, he's not a salamander, so he doesn't care about that. He does care about, anyways, the relics, anyways, of Armageddon and the Imperium.
Yeah.
So, like I said, he hasn't completely shifted over, but I mean, I do think, anyways, that he has his concept of humanity has drastically changed from the beginning. Like I said, that concept, anyways, of where they are chanting his name, anyways, hero of Helsreach, and he, in his own words, he says, as if there was only one. It's almost like it's an interesting philosophy that his philosophies have changed.
Well, it depends on how you look at it. Is he saying that just about everybody that was there, or is he just saying that about his Marines that were there?
I would say, anyways, about all the people he fought with. Because right before that, he talks to some people that actually also survived the cathedral's collapse. And the people he's talking to, by the way, aren't Templars. All the Templars died other than him.
Yeah.
And some of the stuff that he says during that time or what he thinks, like, for instance, one of the guys, like the guy we mentioned anyways, we didn't have time to talk about, Andrei Valatok.
Yeah.
He's actually happy to see that he's still alive, which is very different for a Templar.
Yeah.
And, you know, Templars are just kind of like, oh, it still lives. Whatever. Pick up your gun, you idiot.
Yeah. I don't care if you lost your arm.
It barely worked anyways. Yeah. So I think, anyways, his character arc has drastically changed throughout the course of this battle. But other than that, anyways, I mean, that's kind of Grimaldus' story, which I find interesting. And like I said, we've already kind of talked about. What do you think, anyways, of the actual defense of the city itself, the siege itself? I'm not talking about Grimaldus, but the rest of it.
I think both sides lent to their strength actually pretty well. The Imperial Guard, just for one thing, they were just outmatched in mass and in firepower, for that matter.
Right. Speaking of firepower, anyways, I was very disappointed, though, in Oberyn.
Yeah.
They finally got it to work. I'm like, yes! He used it! And they used it once.
And then they were sent away to help other places.
Yeah. It's like, oh, man. I wanted to see that thing just keep firing.
Yeah.
Just keep blasting the rest of the Gargants. It'll be good. Yeah, that was kind of depressing, especially because he just kept getting brought up over and over and over again. You're like, when is it coming? And then it finally does. And then it leaves after one shot. I agree with you, though. I think the way that they actually position people, they definitely made the orcs pay anyways, trying to take that city. But okay, so one last question, I guess, anyways. So at this point, though, in Armageddon, if we recall right, this part in Armageddon, half the world is been corrupted by demons. So do you think, anyways, what do you think has happened at this point? Is it just become a stalemate where the orcs and the humans are just kind of like, well, we still have these giant walls. As long as you protect that side of the city that you kind of conquered and we protect the other side, at least the demons won't get us?
I don't know.
And then we can, when the demons are gone, then we can go back to killing each other.
So I just had this humorous thought. It was like, you know what? We should maybe use the same wall. Good idea. And all of a sudden, randomly see, like, across the line, like, an orc right next to a human randomly.
Well, on that interesting note, we are out of time for today. Join us next week as we give our final thoughts on this planet and try to answer some questions as to the main characters, such as what happened to Gazgul, Yark, and Helbrecht.
Fantastic. But if you enjoyed our little show, could you please be so kind as to push that subscribe, like, or follow button? And if you wish to help us expand our work on 40K lore, by all means, support us by joining our membership program on our YouTube channel, Tales of Ashraka.
Indeed. And most importantly, have a great day. And until next time, this is Ekthar.
and Yuxin.
Signing off.